So we're going to go on having a look at Steven Pinker's Enlightenment Now. We're in the first chapter, Dare to Understand. And he's outlining the four themes: reason, science, humanism, and progress. Yesterday, we heard a little bit about reason, and today we're going to focus a little bit on the second ideal of science, which is the refining of reason to understand the world. The scientific revolution was revolutionary in a way that is hard to appreciate today, now that its discoveries have become second nature to most of us. The historian David Wooten reminds us of the understanding of an educated Englishman on the eve of the revolution in 1600. This is from David Wooten. He believes, he's saying this is the understanding of an educated Englishman. He believes witches can summon up storms that sink ships at sea. He believes in werewolves. Although there happen not to be any in England, he knows they are to be found in Belgium. He believes Circe really did turn Odysseus's crew into pigs. He believes mice are spontaneously generated in piles of straw. He believes in contemporary magicians. He has seen a unicorn's horn, but not a unicorn. He believes that a murdered body will bleed in the presence of the murderer. He believes that there is an ointment which, if rubbed on a dagger which has caused a wound, will cure the wound. He believes that the shape, color, and texture of a plant can be a clue to how it will work as a medicine because God designed nature to be interpreted by mankind. He believes that it is possible to turn base metal into gold, although he doubts that anyone knows how to do it. He believes that nature abhors a vacuum. He believes the rainbow is a sign from God and that comets portend evil. He believes that dreams predict the future if we know how to interpret them. He believes, of course, that the earth stands still and the sun and stars turn around the earth once every 24 hours. A century and a third later, an educated descendant of this Englishman would believe none of these things. It was an escape not just from ignorance, but from terror. The sociologist Robert Scott notes that in the Middle Ages, the belief that an external force controlled daily life contributed to a kind of collective paranoia. Rainstorms, thunder, lightning, wind gusts, solar or lunar eclipses, cold snaps, heat waves, dry spells, and earthquakes alike were considered signs and signals of God's displeasure. As a result, the hobgoblins of fear inhabited every realm of life. The sea became a satanic realm, and forests were populated with beasts of prey, ogres, witches, demons, and very real thieves and cutthroats. After dark, too, the world was filled with omens portending dangers of every sort: comets, meteors, shooting stars, lunar eclipses, the howls of wild animals. To the Enlightenment thinkers, the escape from ignorance and superstition showed how mistaken our conventional wisdom could be and how the methods of science, skepticism, fallibilism, open debate, and empirical testing are a paradigm of how to achieve reliable knowledge. So I want to pause there to think about what's been said, because I find this whole path of thinking to be so important these days. There are people from all corners of life who disrespect science and disrespect the accomplishments of science. And I find this fascinating because when you look back in this way at the description of what life was like before we had any verification of anything, any way of measuring anything, any way of developing theories about how anything actually works, how utterly terrifying and out of our control everything was. And even today, we, of course, are going through a technological new age like nothing that has ever occurred on the face of the earth. And much of what we hear is how horrible that is, what dystopia that is in the process of creating. And this is, I suppose, a debate worth having. I just recently heard a talk by Marianne Williamson, who is running for president and is really an incredibly articulate spiritual teacher. And she was describing how, in her way of thinking, the discovery of science and the enlightenment was a huge breakthrough, but it, to some extent, again, to her way of thinking, threw the baby out with the bathwater, that there was some connection to soul that we threw out when we attempted to throw out religious thinking, that that contributed to a loss of balance, a loss of perspective, a loss of priority on taking care of things that need to be taken care of, human aspects of life that perhaps have been thrown away and even exploited out of greed and the thirst for power. So this is a story that we hear quite a bit. It's a little bit different story than the story that Stephen is telling. Stephen is telling the story of what great benefit this revolution in our way of thinking was brought by the advent of reason and science. And he begins to talk about how what this led to is a belief in such a thing as a universal human nature. I'll read a little bit about that. That knowledge that the Enlightenment brought includes an understanding of ourselves. The need for a science of man was a theme that tied together Enlightenment thinkers who disagreed about much else, including Montesquieu, Hume, Smith, Kant, Nicolas de Condorcet, Denis Diderot, Jean-Baptiste d'Alembert, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Jean-Baptiste Vico. Their belief that there was such a thing as universal human nature and that it could be studied scientifically made them precocious practitioners of sciences that would be named only centuries later. They were cognitive neuroscientists who tried to explain thought, emotion, and psychopathology in terms of physical mechanisms of the brain. They were evolutionary psychologists who sought to characterize life in a state of nature and to identify the animal instincts that are infused into our bosoms. They were social psychologists who wrote of the moral sentiments that draw us together, the selfish passions that divide us and the foibles of short-sightedness that confound our best laid plans. And they were cultural anthropologists who mined the accounts of travelers and explorers for data both on human universals and on the diversity of customs and mores across the world's culture. So this is a good place to stop. I think I said what I need to say for now. And thank you again for joining on this little journey to discover what Steven Pinker has to say about the Enlightenment and reason, science, humanity, and progress. See you again soon.